All right, so it is 2021 Hanukkah. This week is Hanukkah. Hanukkah is 8 days. And we are going to light the candles on the menorahs that we have. And I will share a little bit of insight. I'm not going to go anywhere near as in-depth with the reason for the season or in history what happened. I've chosen to avoid that this year, and we're just going to cover some other things instead. Every year I like to try and read through notes that I have, and if there's a teaching that I do annually or something because of a feast day, then I usually have to try and change it up each time, especially if some of you were here last year and would remember it. So basically in the book of Maccabees, which can be found in certain Catholic Bibles, usually is what they're referred to as, where the Apocrypha is in there, 1st and 2nd Maccabees is in there, and this is where you'll find some of the initial history of what happened. But to make a long story short, after oil was found, or after the temple was taken back and the revolt took place, they went to go into the temple and begin to rebuild and to do things that needed to be done in there. And when the menorah was established and set up, they found that they only had enough oil for one day. And to make oil the way in which it was required to burn the menorah continuously is an 8-day process, the way that it's made, and to make kosher oil for use in the menorah. That's how long it takes. And part of the miracle that's described in there is that while they were going through the process, the menorah that they used the oil for one day to light stayed lit for the 8 days that they were then making new oil. So Hanukkah, in a way, is referred to as the Festival of Lights, is not a commanded Moedim. Moedim is the word for holiday or appointed time. It's not a commanded one, but it is one that's traditional and one that the Jews traditionally continue to keep since the time of the Maccabees. And as we're going to see near the end of our Bible study, it was so obviously traditional and they were accustomed to keeping it that Yeshua, who even observes it and keeps it, shares actually the most revelatory piece of information that he could share with the world. He shares on that particular day, and does it during the Feast of Dedication, or does it during Hanukkah. So we're going to look at that later and discuss that in part. But I want to describe a couple of simple things as we light the candles, and I'm going to have Jeff light what I've got over there. But if you look at the Hanukkah menorah, you'll notice that a regular menorah, which I don't know if you can see it, that I have up on the bookshelf up here, similar to what was in the temple, a regular menorah has 7 branches, but a Hanukkah menorah, being that it is 8 days, has 9 branches on it. And you light, you'll notice if you look at the heads on the Hanukkah menorah, that one of them is usually, not in all cases, but there's usually one that's either in the middle or one that's on one of the ends that is raised up higher than the other. And on these two, it happens to be the middle one. And in that particular spot, that candle is referred to as the Shamash candle. And we're going to look at a couple of different translations for what that word means. It means not only sun, which you can see the simple connection is that being the Hebrew word for sun, because obviously the candle is providing a light and a heat and similar things to the sun. But the word Shamash also means servant. And so it's referred to as the servant candle. So what I'm going to do, and this is representative of what we are to do in our community. This is representative of what we are to do in the lives of other people, is we are the Shamash candle. We are the servant candle. And as we are lit, we are to be used to bring light to other people, right? And so as you light the Shamash candle, I will then, and I'll give you this here in a second. Here, Jeff, you can do the same thing I'll do if you want. So I'm going to use this candle to light the other candles, and then I'll put it in there. And this just signifies the job, right, the work that we have. And it's not really a big thing. It's traditional whether you go from right to left or left to right or whatever. It really doesn't make a big deal. I usually go from right to left simply because, go ahead, Jeff, take that candle, let the rest. I usually go right to left because Hebrew reads from right to left. If you notice, every time you see the terms right and left in the scripture, right always represents the spiritual, left always represents the physical. Not that the physical is bad, it's just physical. And so the whole goal of the time of Hanukkah, as we celebrate this time, is about bringing the light, bringing the light of God, who God is, into the world. And so as you start, as I start lighting them, I go from the right to the left because eventually by the last day of Hanukkah, if you haven't already gathered this, the entire menorah will be full of candles, right? On the first day, you light the shamash candle, you light the first candle. On the second day, you light the shamash candle, and you light the first, the next two candles, and so on and so forth until you get to the 8th day, and then you light, the entire menorah, and all the candles will be lit. So as Larry was gracious enough to purchase, they're up on the top. Larry was gracious enough to purchase Hanukkah candles for us last year, and so we're able to use some of them this year. And so this is lighting the candles. I will just, while we get ready to do this, I don't know how quickly we're going to get through the material. If any of you have any questions, I'll give you a second now. I mean, I know I haven't shared very much information, but if you have any questions now pertaining to Hanukkah or anything that you wanted to ask in particular, feel free. Otherwise, I can open it up again at the end, to take any other questions.
So you light one a day, and then at the end of the day, or that whatever period of time is, you blow those out, and then you relight them again the next day and add one.
No, you let them burn all the way down.
Okay.
Yeah. So and these are fast burning, as I was explaining to Jodan, these are fast burning candles. So you'll see that before the end of our Bible study, they're going to be burned down. And they also do not extinguish very much wax. So there may be a little bit that drips onto the table or something. Obviously isn't a big deal. There may be some that's on the candlestick or whatnot, but I would, it's nothing to be worried about. Most of the Hanukkah candles just burn up quickly and the wax doesn't leave much residue. So.
Question: do they give gifts the 8 days during Hanukkah?
Yes, that is traditionally one of the things that's done every day during the gift, or every day during the feast. You will give a gift to everyone in the family, but they're always to be considered. I mean, sometimes there'll be games, and there are games that are traditionally played as well in the evening. And so every once in a while, they'll give gifts to children, but normally the gifts are always practical, and they're always simple, and they're easy. So if a family is struggling financially and they have an issue, they can buy, a package of 12 socks and individually wrap, a pair of socks every day and just, give the child a pair of socks. So in some cases do that, but every gift is always something that's needed. It's never intended to be a gift of something that, and how do I put this? Because this is really reminiscent. I'm glad you asked that. So this is really reminiscent of the way we should be. We should be intuitive and attuned with our neighbor, and we should know what their needs are. And when we go to give somebody a gift or a present or a part of ourselves, we shouldn't be giving them what means more to us that they don't really need. We should be giving them something they need, something that's part of who they are, something that's going to help complement, part of their makeup. So you don't just necessarily, buy a bunch of games and toys or whatever else and then just hand them out to children, during that time. But in some cases you may. I mean, you may do that because the child may have a need for that, or whatever the toy is. It's a learning thing. They may need that. So I wouldn't discount it. But go ahead, Dave.
It seems to be a historical association with Christmas, but you just define. Because remember, Jesus was a servant. He emphasized his servanthood when he came to earth. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. He didn't come to be served, but to serve. So yeah, we definitely see that in him. And there's obviously always a earmarked connection to be made between any of traditionally celebrated times in Judaism or any of God's appointed times. Our traditional holidays of Easter, of Christmas, of other observances all fall around the same time frames and often involve similar practice. But so just as we enter into this whole season, I mean, we are entered into, regardless nation, creed, race, belief, anything. Almost everybody in this country recognizes that we've entered into a phase between Thanksgiving and Christmas where we are usually trying to show appreciation and thankfulness for what's going on, right? Entering into a phase of looking a little bit more attunedly towards our neighbor and perhaps what's going on in the community. So as we do that, that'll be my goal. So, all right, so what I did with this teaching this year is, and I had forgotten what this teaching really was about, just like I did last year until I opened it up again and started to look at it. And then I remembered that this is actually, of all the things that I do, either annually or a lot of things I do, this is one teaching that always I really enjoy looking at because I remember specifically when I start reading through the notes, I remember the day that I put this together, and I remember the day that this hit me like a ton of bricks reading through some commentary. And usually before I get into this, I'll spend a bunch of time reading through Maccabees and that, and I just decided not to this time because I want to draw out and specifically focus on the points that I actually bolded in red. So there's three different things that I put in red that are now page 4, on the back of page 4, and that's all new material that I created, and I want us to spend some time looking at that. So this is part of the reason why I didn't staple it together either, is because I'm just going to go through the whole teaching as I normally do every year. We'll stop and talk about some points and ask questions, but when we get to page 4, that's really kind of the meat of what I wanted to go through today, is discussing some of these ideas, reading some of the other scripture in context and in its fullness that's quoted in what we're doing. So I'm just going to go ahead and read through the sheet and then maybe give you some more background information so you know how this came together. What is Hanukkah? The rabbis taught on the 25th day of Kislev, Hanukkah commences and lasts 8 days, on which lamenting in commemoration of the dead and fasting are prohibited. So lamenting and fasting are prohibited during a time that you should be looking at using every vessel of your life and every component of who you can be to bring light into the world. What does fasting do? Primarily focuses on you and trying to get away from the body and trying to lean more heavily on the spirit so that you can be filled, so that you can be connected this way. And there's nothing wrong with fasting, but when you have an obligation to be a light to those around you, sometimes focusing on yourself really gets in the way of that, right? And then obviously focusing time on efforts on those who by definition cannot change because they've passed. There is a time and a place for this, and there are commandments specifically in which we're given to do that. But again, during a time when you are to be looking at how to be a light to your neighbor, you focus on those that are closest to you, that you can do that with, right? So when the Hellenists entered the sanctuary, they defiled all the oil that was found there. When the government of the house of Asmoneans prevailed and conquered them, oil was sought to feed the holy lamp in the sanctuary of Norah, and only one vial was found with the seal of the high priest intact. The vial contained sufficient oil for 1 day only, but a miracle occurred, and it fed the holy lamp 8 days in succession. These 8 days were the following year established as days of good cheer, on which psalms of praise and acknowledgement of God's wonders were to be recited. So here, I'll read my notes to you, but this has meant a lot to me as I've looked at this over the years. It always gets deeper and deeper for me as to what some of this means. During my study, I happened upon a rather long discourse in Talmud concerning appropriate and inappropriate ways to observe Hanukkah. Why does a discourse on such things matter? Why are such questions important and relevant to our participation in the celebration? And I don't know if I've done this before, but this time I actually want to stop and talk about that statement and talk about that question with you guys for a moment. I know for some of us, maybe not anymore, I don't know, but sometimes for some of us it can sound legalistic to start getting into an approach of why there needs to be a discussion about appropriate or inappropriate ways in which to observe something. And more than any time that's going to happen, it's probably going to be when it's also a traditional thing, right? Because again, Hanukkah is not a commanded time where we're given instruction about what to do. I mean, on Passover, we're given instruction about how to go about doing it, and we're even given instruction by Yeshua later about doing it in remembrance of him. And there's certain things that we're commanded to do, but Hanukkah is all a traditional thing. Christmas is a traditional thing. But is there an imperative that we would have for ourselves, do you think, about inappropriate and appropriate ways to celebrate? I mean, even Christmas, how many times, and I'm not trying to open up a can of worms, I'm not trying to have a huge debate, and I think most of you will understand and probably agree with what I'm going to say, but how many times have you been into some kind of conversation in your decades of experience about how commercialized Christmas has become? Because everybody's running around trying to figure out some way in which to have their black line and being a black, right? And so throughout our years, we at least have been able to acknowledge and see that there are different spirits about which we can go about celebrating times, and really looking at them. And so maybe sitting down and being thought-provoking, either with our family, our friends, or ourselves, whether it's in a study or something else, to sit and talk about things that could be considered appropriate or inappropriate ways of observing a particular time, maybe that would really do our souls some good. To be soul searching and to think about that. And in this particular area, as we're going to go through and read all the different comments that I have in the boxes, that's what this is. This is literally, as my statement said, there's a long discourse. I only pulled out a few snippets of it, but there's a long discourse in the Talmud about inappropriate and appropriate ways of observing Hanukkah, which is, again, just a traditional time. But the revelations that came to me out of, and hopefully will come to you in some part, of just what these comments were that they made, were just fascinating to me. Because my mind was not looking at them at a way of, I need to make sure I walk a straight line. I need to make sure I observe Hanukkah only this way. My mind was, how best can I serve Christ, and how best can I observe the time and make it be representative of Him? And how best can I learn from what it means to be a light? Because again, during the Festival of Lights and the Feast of Dedication, I should be, as those are both terms and names for this time, because Hanukkah means to be dedicated. So how can I better myself in being dedicated to shine light? And that's really what this whole entire week was supposed to be about. If we had, and I know most of us, if not all of us, were probably not raised culturally to celebrate Hanukkah. So when it came on Sunday, we weren't necessarily engrossed in looking at it. And all throughout the entire week, we haven't necessarily been engrossed in thinking about it. But were we to be conscientiously focused on it, that's what we should be thinking about, is how best do I change and refine my own character to become a vessel that's dedicated in establishing light, right? Shining light. So the number one statement that I have, what they discuss is what shall and what shall not be used for lighting. And then this isn't just the Hanukkah menorah, but this is also referring to the Sabbath candles. So there's discussion that goes back and forth between both of these, because in some cases small menorahs were used on the Sabbath to light candles, or they're just normal candlestick holders, that once a week when the Sabbath comes in, there's a tradition of lighting candles and observing that and welcoming the Sabbath time to come in. And so there's a discourse on what should or should not be used for lighting, and the discourse involves wicks, waxes, and oils. What should or should not be used to provide light. And if you just think about that last question, for the most part, man, that is a really good question. Because when we're thinking about how do we use the tools that God has given us in our lives to shine light around us, what vessel should or shouldn't be used? And what is an appropriate way or an appropriate place or time? And forgive me if I don't necessarily have some of the full names or whatever else, but this one individual, Ravaz, said, number one, the wicks, which the rabbis forbade the use of in the Sabbath lamp, are prohibited because they give a flickering light. In other words, the question is asked, why would certain wicks be prohibited from being used in the makeup of a candle or in a particular lamp? And one type of wick that might be used would be one that creates a flickering light, because that's going to create instability. You don't want your light to be on and off, on and off, on and off. You want your light to be shining. You want the way you present yourself to other people to be something that they feel hopeful has stability, right? And number two, the second point of this is the oily substances. Certain oily substances were prohibited from being used, and this is all rabbinical law, as Dave and I have talked about several times. This is different commentary. And sometimes some of the rabbinical laws that they've made, it's difficult to find some good explanation for, or it's difficult to perhaps settle. But sometimes some of these things really spoke to me. And in this particular case, oily substances were prohibited because they do not adhere to the wick. In one way, this is like a portion of God's Word that you feel resonate with you, and you have an idea about a way and perhaps in which it should be lived or taught or spoken, and it just doesn't seem to come out right. Maybe it's something you need to hold on to a little longer. Maybe that oil in you just isn't quite right at the point where it's going to adhere to the wick, and maybe that's something you still need to continue to resonate with God about, and just continue to hold on to. But in number one, and you'll find out why I actually have a number on each one of these, because each one of these has a pertinent point, as we're going to see it in something out of the gospel. So you'll notice why I have a number. But number one is that the fear that the light can be extinguished. That's what a flickering light does, right? It leaves people hopeless, potentially, and it gives them a fear that that light may not last, right? It may not, again, be stable. And it can be extinguished. Isaiah 42:3 says, a bruised reed he will not break, and a dimly burning wick he will not extinguish. He will faithfully bring forth justice. A dimly burning wick. You know what that is, right? That's when the candle gets down to that last little bit. And the fuel that it's burning is right at its utmost final point, and it starts to flicker. Each one of these may do that for just a brief moment. When it gets down to the end, you can see they've already burnt probably a quarter of them already. And when it gets down to a certain point, you'll see it flicker a little bit. But even that time frame for somebody who still has had stability in the Lord, he doesn't snuff out. So we need to, right, not snuff out the hope or the final hopes that somebody may have in a circumstance.
So that applies something like if you say you're a Christian and then you tell somebody you're going to come over and help them and you don't come over there. That's a candle that flickers.
Yeah, for sure. And during that time period, you've actually hidden your light altogether.
Under a bushel basket.
Yeah, that's a whole nother, when I wrote the book stuff that I was writing about light and salt, man, that was one of the biggest things that hit me was the idea that in most cases, not all, but in most cases, the basket that Yeshua is referring to, that people try and hide their light under, is a wicker basket. What's going to happen if I take a wicker basket and put it over these candles? Now at that point, the wicker basket, which normally could be used for what? What can you imagine they'd use a wicker basket for back in that time? Huh?
Carrying stuff.
And usually fruits and vegetables from market. So usually this basket, which was used to contain fruit, is no longer viable and even usable for its function, right? So sometimes trying to hide your light not only damages you, but it damages the vessels in which you're trying to use to hide it, right? And it can set on fire things that shouldn't be burning. So yeah, that can be a real danger. So the number 2 part, talking about the oil, really what I related that to is my works or his works. What adheres to the wick? This is a real question we should have for ourselves. Again, we have an option of trying to define for ourselves how best to live the life of Christianity and how best we think that we should love our neighbor and how we should treat them. Or we have an opportunity of applying ourselves to do what he's already prescribed, what he's already commanded, the gift and the beauty of that, and recognizing this is why I teach, right, the observance of the commandments of his Torah in this way. The beauty of it is that we have ourselves and our own individuality to pour into that. Nobody is going to wear tzitzit or look at them the same way I do. Nobody is going to observe the Sabbath the same way that I do. Each one of us is going to individually accomplish and participate at some level of function in every single one of those differently, because we each have our own individuality. So when we are trying to figure out what adheres to the wick, for the most part, we should be expecting to use the same thing Yeshua did. He observed what his Father gave him. He commands us to do the same thing. The yoke that he invites for us to take on is something that adheres, right? I'm sure you can see all those connections. Hebrews 1:9 says, thou hast loved righteousness and hated lawlessness. Therefore God thy God hath anointed thee with the oil of gladness above thy companions. I have those 2 marked in red because when we get to the end of this, we're going to actually go and look at some of those verses in context and read through some of it.
Can I back you up just a hair?
Yeah.
Isaiah 42:3. What would be considered a bruised reed?
I would presume that would be a reed that is probably, if I'm thinking right of the right geographical location, I'm thinking of a stick that is not completely, dried out yet and broken, but very close to being. When it's connected to the plant, it's still, when the reed is connected to the plant, it's going to be green, it's going to be thriving, there's going to be a strength and a durability to it, right? I mean, you know that in almost all plants, when you have a brand new sapling and if you're trying to break the stick, I mean, it just shreds and comes to pieces because it's completely there. If it's separated and dries out, Dave, what do you want to say?
These are beat, and you've been bruised, and you get damaged. He's gonna take it easy on you. It's not time to push you down. You're a bruised reed.
Soul's wounded, someone hurt you.
Yeah, the plant reaches a point, just like the candle, and it not, putting on a dimly lit wick. The plant reaches a point.
Jesus helped you out a lot.
Yeah, the plant reaches a point of being, nearly dried out and nearly destroyed, or easily be broken or something, and he doesn't bring that kind of destruction or that breaking. Anything else?
That whole chapter 42 is about Jesus Christ, especially the first 17 verses. He's talking about a servant. You've been talking about a servant. And Jesus was the ultimate servant. The special servant, whatever you want to call it.
All right, the number 2 point that I drew out of their conversation, I thought about trying to go back and finding this whole discourse again in the Talmud and seeing if there's more to bring out. But the second point that I brought up, the rabbis taught it is a merit to put the Hanukkah lamp on the outside door of the house, and he who lives in an attic puts it in a window that opens into the street. Both of those locations earmark areas as an invitation for the public to become engaged and see the light of the message to be shared.
We did that all the time at Christmas, don't we?
So it's making sure that you're putting your light somewhere where it's visible.
I did that already. I put a little tiny light out there.
Where it can be seen by many.
Yeah.
And in some cases, sometimes that draws in attention that may be unwanted. But you have to be prepared to still hang a light and put it up. There's some stories you can find of individuals that chose to light Sabbath candles or hang menorahs during times of occupation, during times of war, and during times that might have been an issue for them and their family. Sometimes we still have to put our light out in the front, even when the wrong kind of person may be looking for that as a target, so they know where to take trouble. Right? I wouldn't suggest, I guess, that we do it intentionally, because anytime you want to do it intentionally, try and swing it in somebody's face, you're not presenting the right message. But to still plan to have your life be a vessel that displays the light of God in all circumstances that's, I guess, the kind of faithfulness that I would need to imply.
So did this stem off of, or did it come off of the Hanukkah and stuff about when people went during war, put a light in the candle for their loved one that was gone? They used to do that. They'd light a light in the window, and still they do, but was this the kind of the beginning of that, or the teaching of that, or?
It definitely wouldn't have been a Jewish teaching, but it potentially could have come from somebody having observed something and decided to appropriate it for their own use. And I'm not necessarily against, I don't mean to make it sound like I'm against somebody having done that, but if you remember at the beginning of this, I read that there was a potential prohibition made when you're planning on celebrating the time of bringing light into the world, that you're not setting that time aside to think about, those that have passed, or, it's not bad to remember them. It's not bad to have a memorial, but during a time when you're specifically aiming towards how do I be a light to those around me and how do I celebrate this time of the light of heaven coming down to the earth, you don't focus on yourself and you don't focus on those that are no longer capable of changing. Right?
I liked when you said like a stick or a branch, because he is the vine and we are the branches, right? So would it be fair to say you could use that as a bruised reed or a bruised branch, part of?
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
we're not talking
branches.
about trees or anything, so.
Yeah, we are branches, and this whole particular passage, Dave was right in using it the way he was towards Andy, and I assume Andy already knew this, but this is exactly what's going on, is he's talking about those that are just very close to one or two aspects of life, either emotionally being distraught and having an issue and not being broken or snuffed out, or those that are at the age where they're feeling that way. Not necessarily emotionally, but just at a point where they're just not capable of as much as they were, but yet they still have a light to shine. They still have a function and a job, right? You know, it's an honor on both ends. And I don't remember if I...
So actually, a bruised reed and a dimly burning wick are very similar in the aspect of the way you put them into focus of people in the family. So they could be that they have been bruised or harmed some way, or that their life has been, because just of the way life can treat you sometimes, and just make you not burn as bright as you're supposed to. And it says here that he will faithfully bring forth justice.
Well,
It
it's
doesn't
also...
say you'll restore it or this, that, and the other. That statement right there says that he understands.
Yeah, both those two things are also showing two sides of a similar coin. So you have on the one end, the plant is green and at its strongest rate when it's attached to the source. And the wick is something that's trying to display light, which is when you're connected to the source, your job is to display what you're learning is light, so to speak, right? And so it's showing two different sides of the same coin. The person who's struggling in being connected to the source is not broken. And the person who's struggling to display light, although they may still be connected to the source, because the wick is connected, right? And although it may still be connected, it's having its trouble, shining, and that's still not snuffed out. So it's showing also the two sides. Were you gonna say something, Dave?
The root, the reed is still rooted into the ground. It's still there and it's still surviving, but it's just bruised.
Isn't a part of the you said when he talks in there about he's going to bring forth the judgment. And part of judgment, I don't ever think like that. I think I'm going to get judged. I'm going to get sentenced. You get thrown in jail or whatever. You judge to go to hell or whatever. But part of that judgment, righteous judgment of God, is if you've been the victim, he's going to restore you, right? So if you've been bruised, you're down and out, God's not going to snuff you out. He's going to try to restore you to be what it was that he created you to be, something like
Well,
that.
judgment and justice are two different things. Absolutely two completely different things.
Yeah, because there's finality in the judgment, but justice, because he says he's going to bring forth judgment, but there's no justice, there's no righteous judgment.
There is.
And it brings righteousness in there.
We may associate oftentimes a negative or a positive connotation to either of those words, but I don't think that we should. I think judgment, I kind of understood what Jeff was saying in the beginning and where he was going with that, because even in our human court system now, a judge is able to rule and make a judgment in the honor or in the side of a plaintiff, and is able to rule. And so for one party, it's an issue, and for the other one, it's not, right? And so what I would say, or simply say about that, is this is why Revelation makes it a point to let us know that to each is given according to what he had done. So whether it's reward or consequence, they are both given to an individual based on what they've done. So sometimes, I think it's Micah that says, what does God require of you, O man, but to do justice, right? To do justice. So I think in part of this, he will faithfully bring forth justice. I think that's also a promise of hope to the person who's having an issue being connected to the source, or the person who's having an issue displaying light, or as much as they would like. If they're having an emotional difficulty with that, I think in a way, this is a faithful promise God's making as well, that he can still bring that from you, right? Because our job is to really bring justice or to display and establish justice.
The truth.
One of the things that I've learned, and especially when you go to throw that word righteous in front of anything, okay? Let's look at what the symbol of justice is.
God's righteousness.
So it's a balance, right? There's a scale.
Well, there's anger and then there's righteous.
No, there's a scale on the symbol of the lady holding, she's the justice and she's holding a scale.
In America.
And it can tip to either end, right? Okay. And what she's after is a balance.
What's the balance? I don't want to take this way.
So if I throw righteous in here, okay, righteous can, from a human aspect, can mean condemning. And so I never want to approach looking for a balance in a condemning fashion. I want to find out what that balance is. There's lots of things I don't agree with, okay? But I can't really say that they're that right or that wrong.
But it's He, God, that's going to bring this unto the truth. He's going to bring it to light. If somebody stole something from somebody and you're in the courts, this person's going to pay back that person. They're going to get back what they lost. This person, in the judgment of what he's done is wrong, has to pay that price.
That seems to be man's justice.
That's man's justice, and that's not really what we're doing.
That's why I don't like the scale thing we were doing, because this is unto truth. This judgment is going to be brought unto the truth. The truth is the word of God. It's going to be brought to light. You God's going to have the final
It's
say.
not fair.
Yeah, see, because if not, you could live over here in the bruised and be a victim mentality. And everybody wants to do that because there's people out there that reward you for being the victim. Keep you, on the phone, food stamps, free of the government program. Anyway, we got to get back on to where you was at, Phil. Sorry.
Bring up.
Sorry, Phil. Got off track. Fell off the way.
And this all goes back to a flickering light, all right, or a bruised reed. Because as I was raised in the Baptist church, and they were very condemning of certain things, okay? I mean, we were required to wear a suit to church and all this stuff.
We were?
Yes, I
That's
was.
why
It
they
was
frowned
once
at
out,
me.
yeah, tie and all. And you know, so if you didn't follow those rules, well, they was in a condemning mode on you already. And the first thing they said is all alcoholics, all whores, all whoremongers, all this, all that, they're just going to go to hell, and they're just going to go to hell. And the older I have gotten, and the more experienced that I have become, and the more learned, I have found that righteous judgment that they fell themselves under is so wrong and does not fit under what God thinks. Where the word will, God's will actually means mind or thinking. And so we can have God's mind and thinking through studying of His Word and seeking what He wants. But when I use mine, I'm not in His thinking, I'm in my thinking.
Amen.
All right, so let's still recap and get off this first page.
This is true.
The first couple things we've been discussing is what kind of light we are displaying, right? And being mindful of what kind of wick we seek to use or adhere ourselves to. And what are we using to try and adhere to that? You know, what kind of oil substance are we using? Where are we establishing that light? You know, make yourselves mindful of where you're going to shine that light. The number 3 point, the rabbis taught the instruction of Hanukkah demands that every man should light one lamp. That's the Shamash candle for himself and his household. Those who seek to fulfill it well have a lamp lit for every member of his household. And this would be an individual lamp where each individual person was able to light their own, should they want to do that.
Is that well or will?
Those who seek to fulfill it well have a lamp lit for every member of his household. I don't know what I said the first time. So,
It said well, I just thought it would be will.
Yeah, just the way it reads is kind
It
of,
sounds like it should be will, but
when I first read it, I don't like it.
well, that's the point that they're making is that the person who wants to fulfill the tradition well will light a candle for every household. And I don't think both words need to be required. So what they're saying is those who seek to fulfill it well, which is the instruction that Hanukkah demands that every man should light one candle for himself. So those who seek to fulfill the instruction well have a lamp lit for every member of the household. So Shamash, what does this mean? This means servant. It's one of the words. It also means son. S-U-N. We'll get to that here in a little bit. I'm going to read the fourth point, and this is one of the biggest points for me. It's one of the ones that really impacted me the most to think about, because this is one of those areas where you can become, and you could look at this and get very legalistic and think to yourself, how sad and foolish that they just make such a big deal. Why don't we just light some candles, enjoy our time together, have fellowship with one another, and enjoy our time? And yet this is really a rich point to get and to make out of this. He says, our Yehuda, in the name of our Assisi, says, it is not allowed to count money by the Hanukkah light. When this was cited before Samuel, he said, is there any holiness in the light? And our Joseph retorted, is there any holiness in the blood of an animal? Now, I know this is stretching and it goes quite far into some different things, but let's see how it's brought back. It says, is there any holiness in the blood of an animal? And yet have we not learned in Bereith, it is written, then shall pour out the blood and cover it. So Leviticus 17:13 is the description that when you're slaughtering an animal for a sacrifice, when you slice the animal and you allow its blood to come out, you are to pour it out on the ground and then cover it with the earth. So when you pour out the blood of the animal, you then cover it on the earth. And this is what they deduce from this, and this is how they bring it back to Hanukkah. It says, from this we infer that he must cover the blood on the ground with the same hand it was shed, but not with his foot, in order that the fulfillment of the commandment might not be treated with a lack of reverence. You understand? So in other words, they deduce, even though the Torah doesn't give this description, they understand what it means to have reverence for the instruction. And if you're using your hand to slice the animal and to drain its blood as you're going to offer it as a sacrifice and it's going to turn into food for you, you don't have such a disdain for the process that you just use your foot to cover the blood over it. Right. And also, being that your hands are the highest part of the body, instead of using the lowest part of your body to fulfill the commandment, they're indicating that you use the highest part. So the same hand that you use to take the blood or the life from the animal is the same hand that you use to cover it over. In other words, you have to get down into what you're doing, right? And that really makes a lot of sense.
It shows, using the foot shows disrespect.
It certainly could, yeah.
Disrespect to God and disrespect to the animal of his creation.
In our case, too, the light must not be used for anything in order that the compliance with an ordinance should not evince a lack of reverence. That's what their point is. And I'll read the rest of what's here to get to it. But I hope that you guys are seeing the real evidence here. Again, the point is, what kind of a light are you? What works are you using to try and shine that light? Is it flickering? Where are you hanging it at? How much reverence are you putting into being a light to those around you, for the community, for your family? What efforts are you putting forth? Counting money is taking into account my own sustenance. Wherefore Hanukkah, a memorial established as days of good cheer, on which psalms of praise and acknowledgement of God's wonders are to be recited, intends to take into account the sustenance of others. That's what shining a light is supposed to be about. And that's why you don't use the light to count what belongs to you. You use the light to see what you have to give to others. By the light of Hanukkah, we offer ourselves to others. Yeshua's words, you are the light of the world. When the light is placed on the lampstand, it gives light to all who are in the house. It's putting light in the right area. Taking into account care for others means using the highest part of our body, the hands, rather than the lowest part, the foot, to bring reverence to God's creation, a work of intentional effort. But just thinking it through, obviously, even the lowest part of your body, your feet, has a very significant use, which is carrying you wherever you need to go to display light, right? So even that portion of our bodies can be used to get us where we need to be to shine light. But this is one point that, yes, we could really get stuck for a moment on wondering what the significance is of whether or not you count money by that particular light. But the inference is obviously very clearly about what are you really trying to do? Are you trying to take your own sustenance into account? And are you using your light to look at your own life and to peer light into places where you can determine? There is a time and a place for that. And there is a time and a place to recognize and understand what God has done for each one of us individually. But during this time, once again, we are trying to understand how do we bring this light of heaven that has been made available for us into our lives and display it in such a way that other people find stability and hope and find sustenance, and how can we be a help to them? So Hanukkah is mentioned.
What does this mean to the poor?
What do you mean? Do you mean this last statement that we're looking at?
This whole breakdown, like, got your number 4. I'm looking at this whole thing, and if I were poor, I don't have any money to count. I had 3 pennies last year. I lost one of them and I spent the other 2. I don't have them.
You don't have to worry about it.
Well, there's two.
What is he trying to say? This is for the rich, right?
I mean, that is
Well,
one way of looking at it, but I don't think so. I think that in the story of the widow's mite, I think we see precisely her having understood what it means to use the light
She sure did.
that she had available
But she did.
to help her see what she had to give, and she gave all that she
All
had.
3
So
cents she gave. She broke.
I've known some people, I'm sure many of you have, I've known some people that were poor and that had very little and on a regular basis. Some that have God in their life and regularly are usually much more happy than those with many financial problems because they have lots of money. And usually those who have money have problems to go along with it. And then I've known some that have a lot of money that could care less about God or anything else, and they just lavishly spend on their own desires. But usually those who have the Lord and those who have a trust and a faith in Him, their need is usually not as overwhelming as their blessing. But to Dave's point, I mean, yes, this is potentially something that is a good reminder. It's also a good teaching for those that have a lot of blessing. Or
Joseph brings in the blood of an animal because he's bringing up other commandments and how they should treat blood. So they're saying you should treat it just like we do blood. And they're trying to argue this to point out. Who are they arguing with? Samuel?
yes. So one person said in the name of another person that you should not count money by the Hanukkah light. And then additional people came in and began to argue and
Yeah,
discuss.
they make picky rules.
They what?
Jesus talked a lot about the Pharisees making picky rules.
Yeah, so you seem to be moving now in the direction of almost thinking this was...
Could we replace the word sustenance with need? So if a man is looking for his needs in the light of the candle, it says, is there any holiness in the light of the candle? And then at the very end here, where it says, establish the days of good cheer, which praises, psalms and praises of and acknowledgement of God's wonders were to be recited. He intends to take into account the sustenance or the needs of others.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily opposed to it. Sustenance creates not just a standing alone need, but it creates a fulfillment. Sustenance means to fulfill the need.
Because the rich man, he depends on his own money for his needs, and he doesn't depend on God. I've been that guy. And then I've been the other guy too, where I've had nothing after having had everything and depended on God for everything, which I'm not a pauper today, but I have learned from those 4 dimly lit days that I had to live through to continue to put that in the light of, in God's light as that He supplied this, I didn't supply it. And I'm supposed to use that in a proper manner, not just for my own greed or my own purpose.
It's very hard for humans to do that. It's not easy for us.
The lessons I learned weren't easy lessons.
But you said, R. Joseph retorted, is there any holiness in the blood of an animal? The answer is absolutely yes. The life of that animal is in the blood. And life is holy, created only by God. Even science today has a problem with life, Where did it come from? They don't know. You all think that it started in a puddle of water on the earth? Science has proven it did not and could not.
Where did the water come from?
It couldn't start in that puddle of water. You're talking about physical things. I'm talking about life.
Yes.
And life could not have started on the earth by itself. Who proved that? To me, science proved it. See, you don't know that. You go by what your beliefs are. I don't go by beliefs necessarily. I do by beliefs. But I also go by science too. At the same time, and wow, science has proven that life could not have started on the earth. They haven't published it out yet. It's not widely distributed. But it's well proven. And it's been for about 15 years. They've proven it could not start here.
Okay.
Where did it come from?
Stars.
Number 5.
Somewhere else.
Yeah, so let's go to John's Gospel.
Life is in the blood of an animal. Okay, John's Gospel.
Okay, so number 1 was dealing with, I'm explaining this to you so that you can understand why in red I have numbers in parentheses, okay? Number 1 was dealing with what kind of flickering light or what kind of light are you displaying? Number 2 is dealing with what kind of requirements or what kind of oil are you using? Are you using your works or his works? What are you using to stick to the wick, so to speak? Number 3 is talking about the positioning of the light. Where are you hanging the light? And number 4 was talking about a reverence, right, for the light. Not using it to count your own sustenance, not using it to take into stock or count for yourself what is of you, but to look at what is for others, right? What can you give for others? And my marking those areas down as I read to you John's Gospel, this portion of it, was me seeing those insights from this discourse, again, in this discussion that takes place in the Talmud, which is what the 4 points are that we covered that I drew out. And I saw this take place. And so in John 10, verses 22 through 42, this is the only place in Scripture where we have Hanukkah, the Feast of Weeks, or the Festival of Lights, whatever your translation calls it. This is referred to. And I told you guys earlier that during this time, Yeshua shares of all the gospel stories that we have, this is the time, during the Festival of Lights, Hanukkah, that Yeshua shares the most revelatory piece of information with the world that there is to share, and that's that he is the Messiah. This is the first time publicly that he proclaims it, and he does it as the light of the world during the Festival of Lights, during the time that we would celebrate light coming into the world. And so John 10, 22 through 42 says, at that time, the Feast of Hanukkah took place at Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple in the portico of Solomon. The Jews therefore gathered around him and were saying to him, how long will you keep us in suspense? How long will you keep flickering? Or what's going on? How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Christ, tell us plainly. Yeshua answered them, I told you, and you do not believe the works that I do. I told them, you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name, these bear witness of me. They have stability. They don't burn out. But you do not believe because you are not my sheep. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me, and I give eternal life to them, and they shall never perish, and no one shall snatch them out of my hand. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of the Father's hand. I and the Father are one. The Jews took up stones again to stone him. Jesus answered them, I showed you many good works from the Father. For which of them are you stoning me? The Jews answered him, for a good work we do not stone you, but for blasphemy, and because you, being a man, make yourself out to be God. Yeshua answered them, has it not been written in your law, I said you are gods? That's from Psalm 82:6. And if he called them gods, to whom the word of God came, and the scripture cannot be broken, do you say of him whom the Father sanctified and sent into the world, you are blaspheming, because I said, I am the Son of God? If I do not do the works of my Father, do not believe me. But if I do them, though you do not believe me, believe the works, that you may know and understand that the Father is in me, and I am in the Father. Therefore they were seeking again to seize him, and he eluded their grasp. And he went away again beyond the Jordan to the place where John was first baptizing, and he was staying there. And many came to him and were saying, while John performed no sign, yet everything John said about this man was true, and many believed in him there. This is Yeshua again, standing plainly in what is referred to as the Portico of Solomon at the temple, standing directly in the sight of anyone and everyone that was there, openly, plainly, having a conversation with the Pharisees in front of everyone, and announcing to the world, just as they said, if you are the Messiah, tell us plainly. And he says, I have told you, but you don't believe me. Look at what I'm doing and see that the works I'm doing are of the Father. This is what he has established. This is what he's built. It's what God prepared. It's what he walked in. And many people chose to believe, and many people followed after him and believed.
And what happened? They tried to seize him and said he escaped their grasp. That doesn't mean that he just walked out. There was a fight of swords.
If we look at it like we are today, us, and listen
They
to
wanted
it
to kill
speak, it'd be different, wouldn't it? Than it was in those days. They were obviously, something was different amongst today.
Well, there's several huge differences. Our culture is obviously not that same culture for one simple practical point, and that's that we have not been raised or groomed to do any of those things. Yeshua came to a people who regularly understood God and had a relationship with him through the observance of the things he established. We are so far disconnected from that, yes, for him to come and have discussion with us about those things would be amazing.
That explains something I've been wondering about. God picked a time in Earth's history to come down and become human. That was Jesus, right?
Mm-hmm.
When was that time?
About 2,000,
Somewhere
21 years.
between Adam and the caveman, and science as it is today, somewhere in between these two extremes. Knowledge, he picked the right time, apparently. He wouldn't have picked the wrong time. He's gone.
He came
That was the right time for him to come.
He came right at a time when there were many lost sheep.
Huh?
I said he came right at a time when there were many lost sheep.
Yeah, the whole Jewish nation was about ready to dissolve.
So, I don't share this often, but some speculate that during the time that he came was right at the time when, yes, that potentially could have happened, because Herod had gained so much control over what was going on, very similar to things that the Catholic Church or other areas might have done in our history. But Herod had gained so much power right at the time that they were starting to go outside the scope of what was supposed to be established with the priests and the priesthood. and it was starting to be on a regular basis that priests were being established and being set up within a temple service that would have brought a great deal of disrespect and dishonor to God. Now, obviously, that had happened many other times throughout history. We know Eli had wicked sons as well who were priests, but there's something to be said about what Herod's rule was over the time, and they believe that I think there were two Herods, right? His son and his father. And right when the son took over, there was an establishment and a change and a turnover of all kinds of priesthood. Yeah. So, all right, so just to kind of briefly go through page 3, this is just a few things to show you what a menorah looks like. This might be it's somewhat closer or whatnot, but the one that is defined in this picture is supposed to be somewhat reminiscent of what was biblically described to be what the description was to be. There would be almond buds, which are little flowery looking things that you see there that were ornamentally designed to be on the menorah. Exodus 25 verses 31 through 40 are what relate the building of it, and I'll tell you a little traditional stories behind that. The golden lampstand was made of pure gold, hammered out of one solid piece, resting on a base. The central stem had 6 branches, 3 on either side, together carrying 7 lamps. The lampstand with its branches was modeled on a flowering almond tree. Now, interestingly, the individual who is charged and tasked with doing all of the work for the building of the things in the temple or the tabernacle, his name is Bezalel. Now, the word El that you hear at the end of his name is a word for God, and a bezel is an onion. So this individual's name is literally, he was the onion of God. And an onion is something that sometimes, involving many tiers, gets peeled back in layers. And this is an individual who had great levels of craftsmanship and was able to do the work, and God even commissions Moses to understand that he has been given all kinds of talent and craftsmanship. The traditional story around the lampstand is that when Moses was given the blueprints, God designed the blueprint for what this menorah should look like. And I'm just going to kind of paraphrase what happens in the dialogue, but Moses and Bezalel look at this and struggle to understand how it's to be made. And they go back and forth with him, asking him question after question, God, I mean, about how it's to be made. And finally, God just determines himself that they should just give him the piece of gold, and he casts it into the furnace from which they were going to make it, and out pops the menorah, because they were incapable of understanding on their own how to bring light into the world. And they needed to have a partnership, and this is basically the whole emphasis that comes from it, is that the partnership and relationship with God was required to know how to bring light into the world. And one of the facets of their contribution, when they then put the menorah where it was supposed to go in the temple, they decided to bevel the windows of the temple so that as the windows, instead of being like this or beveled, it would display more light. So part of their contribution then was to take stock of where the menorah was to be and what could be done to help display more light in the world. So in a way, even rabbinically, this is just a commentary and a discussion traditionally about the need for a partnership and a relationship with God to understand what it means to bring light into the world. Because understanding the full blueprint, right, and Messiah, what does he say of himself? Obviously, he is the light of the world. To understand that full concept and to grasp all of that is not necessarily within the realms of who we are. And so we need his divine assistance and relationship to fully express the light that he's given us. Psalm 119, 105 says, Thy word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. And Proverbs 6:23, which you've heard me quoted here a million times, says, For the commandment, the mitzvah, is a lamp, and the teaching, or the Torah, is its light. The Torah is literally referred to. Yeshua says of himself, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And I've shown you guys before in different studies, different times during our studies, that the exact same 3 statements are made about the Torah. It is the way, the truth, and the life. It is the light of God that dwelt with him in the beginning, that came down, manifested as flesh. God is, or Yeshua is the Word of God made flesh. And each one of the commandments, each one of the mitzvah that he's given, is a vessel, as a lamp, as it says, that when we activate it, it displays who Yeshua is. It displays the Torah. So if you see the connection, as I just went through them, if you see that connection through all of them, that's what each one of the commandments are, is a way of, so to speak, reaching up into heaven and bringing a portion of light down that reflects Yeshua's character. And when you activate it and walk in it, that's what you should expect to display. If it's displaying a portion of you, let me make sure I phrase this right, because I don't want to do away with our own individuality. A portion of our individuality can be illuminated and can shine in this. But the focal point should be on him, right? It should be on him. If it's too much on us, then we're just getting in the way and probably creating a shadow, right? But our own individuality and our own understanding and our own observance of the individual commandment is something that helps people to not see a flickering light and understand some form of stability. And so, just as an interesting insight, I always put this in here. The little box on the side that says how many almonds are in God's menorah designed for bringing light into the world. If you count all the little almond buds that are on there, you'll actually come up with 22. And there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet.
Whoa. I knew there was a connection.
And there is every bit of understanding for us to have that God chose to articulate his word in that language. Many scholars, myself included, believe that originally, before the languages were broken up, this was God's established language.
It is?
I believe so.
You believe so?
Yeah. I believe Paul even indicated that and
Now,
believed it
ancient
himself.
Hebrew was quite a bit different than modern.
Whichever,
I've been monkeying around with the yod, and the ancient Hebrew is nothing like the yod. It's very complicated. And I can't even recall that there's 22 letters in the ancient Hebrew.
no, there's supposedly a missing letter, but either way, what we have regularly penned and inscribed for centuries is a language that consists of 22 letters, and it's Hebrew, and the Torah was regularly commissioned to be inscribed in those.
Yeah.
And it's been going on for quite a while.
As long as
So,
they had
Paul-
ability to inscribe, right?
Paul seems to indicate, I think it's in the beginning of Hebrews 10, his belief that Hebrew was not only a divine language, but the language spoken by the angels as well, because he refers to it that way. So
Yeah.
Paul certainly
The
had
last
that
time I
belief.
talked to an angel, he talked in English.
Maybe
He knew
you,
I couldn't understand.
maybe you heard him in English. What he spoke to you in might have been different.
What I heard is all that's relevant.
Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
I'm counting on this one here, on the paper, I'm counting 29 buds, but is the one that holds the candle, it looks like a bud to me.
No.
That's not a bud?
Almond bud.
And there's obviously 7, so we can subtract 7 from 29, right? You're 22.
I got 22, but I didn't count the candle holder. They didn't have candles, by the way.
Okay.
They had
That looks like a bud here. Yeah, it looks like a bud here.
They look good.
Well, it don't so much here, but
So 1 John 1:5, and this is the message we have heard from him and announced to you, that God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. According, I don't remember exactly why I have all this on here, so this might just be more confusing for someone, but according to the book of creation, the Sefer Yitzhak, God created the universe in conjunction with the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Now I'm really going to be in trouble with Dave, right, if we start keep reading through this. But of these 22 letters, we read, he drew them, hewed them, combined them, weighed them, interchanged them, and through them produced the whole creation, everything that is destined to come into being. The Sefer Yetzirah asserts that all these letters play an important role in the creation of the cosmos by means of the 22 letters, by giving them form and shape, by mixing them and combining them in different ways. God made the soul of all that which was to be created and all that which will be. It is upon these same letters that the Holy One, blessed be he, has founded his high and holy name. And one thing I can assure you of, despite all argument or understanding of ancient or common modern day languages. For the most part, every single one of you in this room has had an opportunity to understand that God's word, as first initially delivered to you, was delivered in that fashion. Because when the word is inscribed through a combination, obviously speaking about the Old Testament or the Torah, when the words of God are formed by using these 22 elements, that's the way you receive it. You have to have a language and you have to be able to read it. Now, as Dave was bringing up as the point, obviously, since we live here in this country and none of us were trained or raised in understanding Hebrew, we've understood English. And we've required what for that? 26 letters to be used and formed to create an understanding for us.
We need a lot more, but.
3 more?
And if you really wanted to just note an interesting intricacy of that, in Hebrew, God's 4-letter holy name has a numerical value of 26. So at least in our own language, God has chosen to reveal himself through 26 other characters. All right? So,
You're gonna have to hurry.
yeah, it's going down. All right, so I don't know how much time we have. We got a little bit if you guys are still good, but I'm on the last page now. I just wanted to bring out again 3 of the things that I highlighted in red just to look at. The first point that we asked when we talked about concerning the idea that the fear that the light may be extinguished, my works are his works, which adheres. And I put, how do these two really go together?
New Testament or Old Testament?
Huh?
New Testament answer or Old Testament answer?
Either one, man.
Faith without works is dead.
Those lights don't even flicker when they get down to mixing up.
Yeah.
They
The
just go
shut
out.
off. That discourse and commentary that they had in the Talmud centuries ago, still applicable and relevant today when they produce these. Because if you notice, if you look at the box, what I did with the box, if you look at the box, you'd see that there's Hebrew lettering on it. And if you would read the back of it, you would find that they were considered kosherly approved, I'm sure. Because I know the site where he ordered them from online. But they're, certain things that would be considered viable and other ones that would be considered not viable for.
So those are missing the other 4 letters?
Windows should be secured to manure cups before lighting.
All right, so I quoted from Isaiah 61. Okay, this is anointed thee with the oil of gladness. And I've been having a lot of conversation with Jeff and some other people in the last week that certain things that just stood out to me in this. So I just ended up printing the whole passage on here and putting it on here. And I thought we would just read through, maybe talk about. If we have any questions about any of this, we will. And I believe this is all of Isaiah chapter 61, but it says, the Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the afflicted. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives. And I want to tell you, too, as another reference point, John the Baptist is in prison at one point and wants to know if he's getting out of prison. He wants to know if Yeshua is coming to free him. And he sends word through one of his disciples to Yeshua because he wants to find out, are you the chosen one? This is basically what John the Baptist sends one of his disciples to Yeshua to ask him. And the main reason why is because he wants to know if he's getting out of prison or if he's staying. And the reason why is because of this. Because when he asks him, are you the chosen one? This is the prophecy he's referring to. This is what he wants to know. And this is how Yeshua answers it. Because he says to the disciple, tell John that I am here to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and he leaves out that last verse, and bring freedom to the prisoners. So he's letting John know at the same time the answer is yes, but it's also no. And John's okay with that. That speaks volumes about his character. So this, I just would give you that as a reference point for the next time you're reading that. So it's in verse 2, it says, to proclaim the favorable year of the Lord and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to grant those who mourn in Zion, giving them a garland instead of ashes, the oil of joy, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the mantle of praise instead of a spirit of fainting, so they will be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified. Then they will rebuild the ancient ruins. They will raise up the former devastations, and they will repair the ruined cities, the desolations of many generations. And strangers will stand and pasture your flocks, and foreigners will be your farmers and your vine dressers. But you will be called the priests of the Lord. You will be spoken of as ministers of our God. You will eat the wealth of nations, and in their riches you will boast. Instead of your shame, you will have a double portion, and instead of humiliation, they will shout for joy over their portion. Therefore they will possess a double portion in their land. Everlasting joy will be theirs. For I, the Lord, love justice. I hate robbery and burnt offering. What do you think that means, that last statement? Obviously, for I, the Lord, love justice seems, I think, pretty obvious. But what do you think this signifies? What do you think that means? I hate robbery and the burnt offering. Do you know what the burnt offering is? It is obviously one of the sacrifices. So what should you be thinking of, do you think, when we see that it's termed as a burnt offering? This is the sacrifice, this is the offering, that 100% of it is to be consumed on the altar. None of it goes to the priest, none of it goes to you, none of it goes anywhere. This is usually done in the form of either the guilt offering or the sin offering, because it's dealing in some fashion or another with sin. And so the entire offering is to go up in flames on the altar. So when you are looking to present something to God, all of it, in some cases, especially if it's a burnt offering, is to go up in flames. Obviously, robbery would be you trying to withhold some of that. Me trying to withhold some of that.
I burnt the beans, and I ate the top layer of beans. I got sick.
I didn't like the tithe. The tithe, so you
Shouldn't have done that.
God.
Yeah. He hates robbery and the burnt offering. This is an assumption that, you know what, I really feel bad about this sinful situation that I'm in. I really want there to be repentance. I really want to make a change. And knowing that you're capable of not scheduling yourself to be in that wrong place at the wrong time, not choosing to do the thing that you know. Let me articulate a story to you. There's a young man who on his way home from yeshiva school or from his studies knows that he gets to a fork in the road and he has two roads to take. If he goes down the one road, there are a bunch of women that are immodestly washing clothes, bathing, doing some other things, and on the other road is nothing, maybe a little bit longer route, but he gets home. And he says to himself, I think I will choose to take the road with the women and make sure I look away. And I will make sure that I don't gaze in any direction and I don't spend any time and there's not one inkling of an idea within me that I will even look at them. And as soon as he takes that road, he's failed. Because the goal is not, will you look? The test was, will you take the road? And the answer is no, you shouldn't. So the idea is, do not test yourself because God has already got enough tests prepared for you. So don't enter yourself into any if you don't have to.
It's a good thing.
Yeah.
Consistent torture.
There's already going to be tests, and there's already going to be issues in your life that you have to overcome. So don't add or compound anymore by putting yourself in a position. So if you literally need to sacrifice something and the entire thing needs to go up in smoke on the altar, don't think to yourself, well, I can just withhold this little bit because I can make the choice and God will love me all the more because I made the choice not to enter into it. No, you've already failed that. And you're risking too much. So that's the emphasis of the burnt offering. And I will faithfully give them their recompense, and I will make an everlasting covenant with them. Then their offspring will be known among the nations, and the descendants in the midst of the peoples. All who see them will recognize them, because they are the offspring to whom the Lord has blessed. I will rejoice greatly in the Lord. My soul will exult in my God, for he has clothed me with garments of Yeshua. He has wrapped me with a robe of righteousness, as a bridegroom decks himself with a garland, and as a bride adorns herself with her jewels. For as the earth brings forth its sprouts, and as a garden causes the things sown in it to spring up, so the Lord will cause righteousness and praise to spring up before all nations. Interestingly, after I was done studying and putting some of this, reading through this and putting it together for things last night, I moved on to the new Bible study that I've been working on. And 5 minutes later, I found myself using a portion of Isaiah 61 in that teaching. And something struck me like a ton of bricks that just impacted me in a way I've never thought about before. You know, we are in verse 6. It says, "But you will be called the priests of the Lord. You will be spoken of as ministers to our God." And I understand, and I already understood, that in Revelation we are also referred to as priests. Do you know why?
No, little why.
Where is the priest at, and what is his job? There's no secret answer to that. It's a simple answer. So,
There's a temple.
yeah, he was to be in the temple, and he had a function, a job, requirements, things established, work for him to do.
Well, if it was the original temple owners going to the Holy of Holies, a priest was assigned that job.
To do what?
To go into the Holy of Holies once a year.
Yeah, once a year. He also was a representative of the people's questions, needs, so to speak, to God. That's why Yeshua is referred to as both advocate or apostle and high priest. An apostle is a representative that brings God's will and understanding to the people, and a high priest is the person who brings the people's will and understanding to God, right? And this is kind of the intermediary area. This is why Yeshua is referred to as both in Hebrews. Where is a temple referred to at now? It's you. It's me. It's our body. This is why we are priests and ministers to God, because we have every bit of obligation and function to prepare sacrifices and to prepare our place as a dwelling place for His Spirit. We have every bit of responsibility in that. And this is how he refers to us as priests. Because it comes with the obligation of duty.
But we have to remember, we are not the high priest.
Yeah.
Only he enters the Holy of Holies. There are many priests, but there's only one high priest. Only he enters the Holy of Holies.
So, putting into terms the idea of the Shamash candle, I'm going to finish this up because we're running out of time here. So, the Shamash candle both means and that's the only one that's left burning over here. That's funny, is the Shamash candle.
First one that was lit, too.
Yeah. So the Shamash candle is a word. Shamash is a word that means servant, and it also means the sun. And I came up with a couple of verses here for you to see how this play on words really could make sense. Look at Malachi 1, verse 11. "For from the rising of the sun even to its setting, my name will be great among the nations, and in every place incense is going to be offered to my name, and a grain offering that is pure," which is a mincha. Remember our discussion of our Cain and Abel? And so, in a grain offering, a mincha offering that is pure, for my name will be great among the nations, says the Lord of hosts. So again, it's not necessarily the fact that it was a mincha or cursed of the ground that was a mincha offering, that's the way in which it's brought, which I think is why he emphasizes an offering that is pure, because it really makes a difference. In other words, Jeff and I have been having discussions about Cain and Abel's. Yeah, we've been discussing Cain and Abel's sacrifice for the last couple of days. I've been thinking about it, and as I was reading this, I realized that the same effort that Abel puts into having to raise and tend and care for the animal that he offered in the sacrifice is the same level of effort that could also be put into growing something out of the earth, bringing it, and then cooking it, baking it, and preparing it in the way that you're supposed to. Because a grain offering, a mincha, is only supposed to be prepared one of three ways. Either as like a matzah, it gets fried, or it's not to be boiled, but it's to be fried or oven baked. So you still would have to put forth effort, and it's all, in those kinds of offerings, it's all about basically what you can afford is part of what it comes down to for when you're presenting this kind of a Thanksgiving offering. So if you had to do a grain offering, you still have steps of self-investment that you're going to have to put time and effort into doing it this way. You don't just walk up and throw some flour and water up on the table and be like, "Here you go, priest, I'll see you later, get the sacrifice done for me." It wasn't like that. Malachi 4:2 says, "But for you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in its wings, and you will go forth and skip about like calves from the stall." That's obviously a reference to Yeshua, and in this particular fashion, when the word shemesh is what's being used, or shamash, You can put the word son in there. You could also potentially put the word servant. But for you who fear my name, the servant of righteousness will rise with healing in its wings, and you will go forth and skip about like calves in the stall. That was fulfilled. The woman of blood with the blood issue who reached out to grab a hold of the corner of his cloak, and the corner is where we're commanded to hang tzitzit. And Yeshua's tzitzit that were hanging from the corner of his cloak, when she reached out, she believed she would be healed and taken hold. And so this idea I wanted to bring out, I underlined and bolded, and you guys should be asking if you were a little bit more versed in understanding, the word Torah and the Greek word nomos, which is translated as that. You would catch something that I caught some time ago and question. Yeshua said to them, has it not been written in your law, I said you are gods? Remember all the conversation we've had about the word Torah and what it means, and that some of the Jews, it also encapsulates or could encapsulate all of the New Testament. It can also encapsulate rabbinical commentary. It can also encapsulate laws that were established and made during the time. For them, it means a little bit more something expanded. When Yeshua says to them, has it not been written in your law, I said you are gods? The answer to that is no. But yes, because it's not in the Torah. And it doesn't say anywhere in the Torah, which we are supposed to look at as a foundation, right? And so he's earmarking for them, and he's bringing out something, because that verse is found in Psalm 82, verse 6, and so he's bringing out something else of significance for them, for the listeners that are asking. Psalm 82 says, it's a psalm of Asaph, God takes his stand in his own congregation. He judges in the midst of the rulers. Understand that statement is insultive. If God has to show up in the middle of the judges, which is what the word ruler should be better translated as, if God has to show up in the middle of the judges to judge for them, then obviously they're not doing it correctly. And this is an insultive statement. This is an understanding that we should have. God takes his stand in his own congregation. He judges in the midst of the rulers. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Vindicate the weak and fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and destitute. Rescue the weak and needy. Deliver them out of the hand of the wicked. They do not know, nor do they understand. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said, you are gods, and yet all of you are sons of the Most High. Do you understand the terminology with that? Mm-hmm. Some people have run off believing that Jesus said we are all gods, and some denominations or beliefs have been formed on the ideas that we are gods or we are just like God. And that's a real issue, because the context of this verse is that God is sarcastically letting them know that he has chosen to let them go down the path of foolishness they are looking for. If they are believing themselves to be gods and making unfair, unjust rulings regularly, then he's going to treat them like that and show them that he's bigger than them, because no other gods exist before him. That's literally the position between him and these unjust rulers, these unjust people. So I said, you are gods, and all of you are sons of the Most High. Nevertheless, you will die like men and fall like any one of the princes. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for it is thou who dost possess all the nations. That's what Yeshua is reminding them of. Because remember, in context for these people, when he has brought this up for them, he's reminding them that don't you say of yourselves in your own understanding of your own law, expanding this foundation that God has already established, expanding it into saying whatever you want. Haven't you already determined for yourself that you are gods? That's what he's reminding them of. Haven't you already said this of yourself? So why are you upset with me if I say it? I'll go back and read the whole context. That's what he says. Has it not been written in your law, I said you are gods? Psalm 82:6. If he called them gods to whom the word of God came, and the scripture cannot be broken, do you say of him whom the Father sanctified and sent into the world, you are blaspheming because I said I am the Son of God? If you do not believe my works, and believe the Father. Believe the works of my Father. Yeshua is letting them know that they have risked entering into being the ones that God is insulting himself. Because if they are not judging righteously and fairly, and if they are not willing to do justice, what does God expect of you, O man, but to do justice? This is why I teach all the time, and I'll just end our study with this. This is something that I think is a real revelation God's Spirit gave me about that verse that says he is zealous for the Spirit. He is jealous for the Spirit he's put inside of us. God breathed the breath of life into each of us as a living soul, and man became a living soul. And I believe that portion of his Spirit that we know has been deposited in us as a guarantee of the eternal life to come, the relationship we have, that is what he's zealous for, because it has the power to enact justice in this place and in this world. And every moment that goes by that we aren't doing justice the way that we should be, he's zealous for seeing that Spirit do that. And he certainly, praise God, doesn't require our lives from us, even when we're not doing what we should be with it. Because if that were the case, I don't know what age I would have first chosen to enter into my own selfish behavior, but at some early age, I'm sure I would have definitely been snuffed out, right? He doesn't snuff that smoldering wick. But he is zealous for that Spirit he's placed within us that is capable of bringing justice into the lives of those that need it. And I can't remember all of the teaching I wrote about it or what I remember now, but there is a passage in the book of Acts where Paul and them get shipwrecked. And if you remember, he ends up on an island, and the natives of the island come, and they see him reach his hand to get wood to put in the fire, and the serpent comes out and bites him. And he shakes it off, and they sit there and they say to themselves, oh, this man is a man that's anti-justice, he's fleeing, and God is caught up with him. And clearly, justice is catching up with this man because this is what it needs to look like, and he's going to die. And they sit there and they watch him, and nothing happens. And they know it's a viper. Viper is the term that's used in the Greek to signify that it is a poisonous serpent. And nothing changes in Paul. And then what does he do? He gets up and he goes with them to their sick and he prays over them. And a lot of them are healed. And I can't remember whether or not there's any resurrections that take place, but I do know that he's taken to the chief who's ill and he's sick, and he's taken to a lot of other people on the island, and he prays over each one of them, and he lays hands on all of them, and a lot of them are healed, and these people get familiar with the gospel. And these people on this island begin to really see and understand what the administration of justice looks like, because that's what it is. It's not a serpent or something bad jumping out of a corner to get you back for what you've done. Justice is bringing health and life and prosperity into those that are suffering. Doing justice, what does God expect of you but to do justice and walk humbly before your God? That's the rest of it. To do justice is to bring life and prayer and healing and health and Yeshua into the lives of those that need them.
Micah 6:8.
Yeah.
People been watching CNN too much on that island.
Can't say that.
Can we go for a stretch into looking at the menorah?
I'm sorry?
Can we go for a bit of a stretch into looking at the menorah?
You mean on this page?
Yeah, I'm sacrificing nap time here, but I just, with all the rest that you put into the lesson, especially at the end, we were talking about the letters. So I have a couple of questions, and then, well, which are going to lead to another one. The almonds, why did he use almonds?
I don't remember right now. I know there's some commentary that I've read about it, and he uses almonds on Aaron's staff as well to signify, right, the priest that would have the role in the office. And there's a lot of significance about it, but I can't remember. I know that one thing that's said about it is the shape of the almond, is that the fruit that the almond leaf, the bud produces, is it's in the shape of an eye, an almond is. And so it's to, where the focus of your eye should be.
Okay. Well, up here, it says the golden lampstand, which I take it here in Exodus, this was how God said he wanted it. It was made of pure gold, so that had to be refined down because gold has to be refined to be pure, right? Okay.
Either way, it gets melted to be shaped, yeah.
Through the heat.
And then it had to be hammered out of one piece, one solid piece. which, if you look at it, that would be physically impossible.
No.
Hang on. And usually when something is made like that, we make a mold. And we pour it in. And we make it with a mold.
They could have done
I'm
that and hammered.
getting there, okay? Resting on a base, the central stem had 6 branches, 3 on either side, together carrying 7 lamps. The lampstand with its branches was molded on a flowering almond tree. Molded on a flowering almond tree. You don't pound and hammer something you're going to mold.
That's not molded, that's modeled.
Or model, okay. All right. I told you it was early and I still have to do work. All right, so, going back to the letters, there's the same amount on here that there is the letters in the alphabet. And it says, when you go back to the ancients of days, all right, and that the letters where he called to the letters, and the story of where they whirled around in front of him, and they all pled their cases to who should be first in their line of the alphabet, and being in creation, and they were the ones who created creation and God's name. Right?
Yeah.
The thing I'm looking at here, I'm getting at, is the central staff, the Shema. And it has 4 of those almonds or 4 of those letters. And the first thing I thought of was the first 4 letters of the alphabet, because each one of those in the alphabet, and completely correct me if I'm wrong, because that's what I use you for, is that each one of those has a physical and a spiritual side and meaning.
I don't know what you mean by the physical and spiritual side, but I mean, each one of the letters definitely has a meaning, and
They all have more than one meaning, and usually they have a physical, which sometimes can be bad or considered bad or not, and virtually a spiritual side of man. So I was just curious when I think about those first 4 letters, where it says the master moved into his house, and he sent forth a messenger to the door of the poor.
yeah, so I know why you're thinking of that from his book. I'm not sure.
Am
I'm hearing a question though, so I'm not sure how to respond. So I know why you're thinking.
Am I just getting into something that just doesn't need to be discussed in a study or maybe
Probably
individually?
has
Or
been, we haven't got the.
You wanna know what?
I'm trying to dig deeper than you taught me already.
You wanna know what?
Yeah, that's-
letters are, is what you're asking?
Huh?
You wanna know what those 4 letters are, is that what you're asking?
No, I know what those 4 letters are, and I know what they represent. I know what they represent when you put them together. I'm just wondering if that could be those 4 letters, because that would be the 4 Gospels.
It could be, you could think it that way.
I mean, you can certainly make any one of the connections, any way that you want with that. And it's the only branch it's going to have 4 because of the way it was designed. But, the story that's painted throughout the letters and some of the imagery that seems to be there is something that we may cover soon in the new teaching I'm putting together. And we'll see precisely some of what he just talked about is actually how some of it begins, so that we can have a good foundation for some things. But I'm still not really sure how else to respond to you. There wasn't anything necessarily wrong in anything that you said. Wasn't hearing your question, so I don't know.
And
some of
maybe
these
I
guys may
just
not know.
posed it, right? Because I'm trying to get confusion of my own out of my head. I was afraid I might
Yeah.
just create more confusion.
Yeah, just to say as politely as possible, that's probably just one of those circumstances where just have to continue to read and meditate on it and just think about it and continue to apply as you see. You know what I'm saying? You and I can sit and talk about it, but some of these guys haven't read that book or anything. They don't know.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? They don't know what's going on.
Whoa.
Did I do it?
You do it.
Yeah.
Water.
Alright, this wasn't coffee.
I've been baptized.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Don't go outside. It's cold out there.
You're good for the day.
Yeah.
You get to take a shower today, you got one there?
I found a study of the letters the most amazing thing. They just, and as I read them, they just came to life, like each one of them was an individual life.
Oh,
And,
I've got one of those.
and it was,
I'm not going to roll that myself today. I just found out.
Alright.
It's showing in, so.
Here, he's there, he's this, and he's that.
Yeah, we actually went to CBS in Minneapolis.
and I see so much of that in as we move to the other readings of things, you know, within scripture. And it's like, dang, there's that one showing up, and dang, there's this one showing up.
Somebody else said it one time, you can see it doesn't take very well.
That's how I found out that you can get a break.
That's in my soul paper on the wall.
Yeah.
I thought that was amazing. They said it
Really?
was your heart fire.
So I might get it by Christmas, I don't know.
So when I see